Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. In this video, I want to discuss some updates to RDNA 3's performance targets and how I believe Nvidia will be competing against AMD going forward. But first, this video is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace has all you need to build your website and make it successful. Their all-in-one platform has everything from website design to marketing tools and analytics. Squarespace is the place to make your dream website a reality. The first Zen microprocessor architecture from AMD can almost be thought of as kickstarting a revolution inside the company. Sure, it was extremely important in terms of the performance that it offered, but it also started AMD on a new path going forward with new innovative technology. For example, Zen 2. Zen 2 offered huge improvements in IPC, clock frequency, and so on, but perhaps the most important thing with Zen 2? Chiplets. We've discussed chiplets tons of times on the channel before, of course, but it basically allows you to plonk multiple chiplets onto a substrate and then build a bigger whole. For example, the 1700X from AMD featured 8 cores, 16 threads. But yeah, with the 3950X, which of course was based on Zen 2, AMD could crank this up to 16 cores, 32 threads on the AM4 platform. This concept is well understood by now, but AMD have yet to incorporate chiplets in a gaming-focused GPU. In fact, they've not even done so in the data center yet, although CDNA 2 likely will feature it. With the first generation of RDNA, AMD used a ground-up design, focused on gaming performance and efficiency. When I first leaked about this in March of 2019, I was told that GCN was going to be fixed. RDNA, or at the time we just knew it as Navi, was going to fix the weaknesses in the GCN architecture for gaming. And indeed, we've seen this. Furthermore, I'd been told that we would see new features added, such as hardware-based ray tracing, variable rate shading, mesh shading, and so on. And of course, all of this has turned out to be pretty accurate. AMD though, yeah, in many ways, you can think of as continuing to build on the success with each iteration of RDNA. In fact, if you look at it as a whole, not only did RDNA fix the weaknesses of GCN, but RDNA 2 fixed the weaknesses of RDNA 1 and so on. The RX 6000 series is extremely impressive and goes toe-to-toe with Nvidia's RTX 30 series in most titles. There are arguments to be made which are outside of the scope of this video of which is the best option for you if you were to take into account just buy anything at the moment because of the shortages. But yeah, like, do you want more VRAM? Is ray tracing performance important to you yet? What about the ecosystem? All of those questions are going to leave you making one decision or the other, for example, out of a 6800 XT or an RTX 3080. But if you look at RDNA 2, in my opinion, you can see the building blocks of what's to come. Perhaps the linchpin of all of this is AMD's decision to utilize the Infinity Cache. This, of course, is a large amount of memory on die, which basically reduces the need for a fast amount of GDDR6 memory, in other words, VRAM on the GPU. This means that AMD can use slower or a narrower bus and still get great performance. But it also translates very well to the future. And we've already seen patents for this with RDNA 3, most likely, with, for example, active bridges. We've discussed this previously in multiple videos, and I'll link those videos in the description of this one, but we will touch on it briefly in this video, and that's a lot of videos. I also put out another video recently detailing RDNA 2 versus 1 in terms of IPC and power efficiency. Power efficiency in particular was incredible. It was a massive leap forward for AMD, and again, it's a sign of what's to come. RDNA 2 clocks like a demon as well, and this is going to be extremely important for AMD going forward. Before we get into the meat of the video, it's worth noting, of course, that this information could be inaccurate. However, a couple of these sources have proven to be very accurate with information for RDNA 2 as well as some Zen 3 stuff, so I tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. However, this stuff is not released yet and AMD's plans can change and, well, you know, the usual pinch of salt and all of that. So what I want you to do with RDNA 3 is imagine RDNA 2, but AMD crank everything up to 11. It is basically an improvement almost entirely across the board. And as I mentioned earlier on in this video, you can think of RDNA 3 as building on the successes and fixing the weaknesses with RDNA 2, much like RDNA 2 did with RDNA 1. And yes, I was about to say 3 there. The big leap forward though for RDNA 3 is going to be the chiplet-based design. And to this end, I'm aware of two chiplets currently anyway on the GPUs. The first is MCD and the second is GCD. I believe that the GCD is what contains all of the compute units. However, I don't think it's as simple as perhaps I originally thought. I do believe there is more complexity, but this was how it was explained to me, at least in the simplest possible terms. I'm really looking forward to seeing some diagrams and some actual more technical information exactly how these blocks are put together. But gist-wise, anyway, you kind of get the idea of what AMD are doing here. For Navi 31 and 32, I'm hearing that it's chiplet-based, but for Navi 33, I'm hearing it's monolithic-based. So originally I was told that the performance targets were 2.5 times greater, but Kopity7 Kimmy on Twitter told me that this was not actually most likely true anymore and that the performance targets were actually greater. So I went back to a couple of different sources and did some digging, and I was told this: the 2.5 times was correct at one point, however, it was pre-silicon. The physical engineering samples that AMD now have in their lab are faster than this, and I'm hearing 2.7 times greater, again over RDNA 2's highest end SKU, so we'll call it the 6900 XT. The number of compute units I'm hearing for RDNA 3's highest end SKU would be 160. This is double that, of course, than the 6900 XT, so the question is, logically, is it even possible to get 2.5 or even 2.7 times greater performance? Well, let's think about that for a moment. Twice the number of compute units, assuming perfect scaling and no architecture improvements at all, as well as no clock frequency improvements, would be 2 times. This is assuming, though, AMD could raise clocks again for TSMC's 5nm process, which is likely, but not a guarantee. There is still some groundwork to be made up for here. If we look at how the scaling was with AMD's Zen line of processors, depending on the application, then yes, scaling is fairly linear. If we compare, say, a Zen 1 8-core processor to a 16-core Zen 2 CPU, we can indeed see that a 2 times performance increase does seem to occur. But CPU results do not necessarily provide any indication if we'll see even slightly the same thing for a GPU. We've also seen those patents for active bridges, which perhaps give us some indication into the direction AMD would go, possibly with a master/control die. But who knows, if it is for RDNA 3, it could be for RDNA 4, although personally I think it's more likely to be for Navi 3X, and more to the point, that still doesn't give us performance insights. But I can say that I'm hearing very good things about RDNA 3. And two other sources who were unique to others who told me about the 2.7 times, they've told me that the gains for an 80CU RDNA 3 GPU would be, well, let's just say very good compared to RDNA 2. I was told by one individual that we could see a 50% improvement, and another told me that that 50% could be, let's go with modest. Although what's interesting is that they've told me that this is not performance per watt scaling, but the other one told me it was and not absolute performance. So there's a bit of mixed messaging there. However, I can say that both of them have told me that this is not ray tracing performance at all. And as I've mentioned a ton of times at this point, ray tracing and geometry performance seems to be significantly better than RDNA 2. Discuss further how Nvidia can actually counter RDNA 3 and, quite frankly, its ludicrous performance in just a moment. But first, a quick message from our sponsor, Squarespace. Designing your dream website doesn't have to be complicated. With a huge range of fully customizable templates and themes to choose from, Squarespace's versatile tools make it easy and simple to create your dream website. Simply select your starting theme template from a large library of themes, all designed around different categories of website. From here, Your website is truly your own, and you can customize it as much or as little as you like. Their platform is more than just design tools, however, with expert advice on hand if you need it, as well as tools for SEO, social media integration, and email campaigns. So whether you're simply building a portfolio or you're selling a product or art, Squarespace is everything you need to get your name out there. Plus, you can save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain with the codename RedGamingTech. You can just use our link in the video description. So let's move over to Nvidia and how they can counter AMD, because quite frankly, if RDNA 3's information is correct, I think it's fair to say that these, future GPUs from AMD are going to be, quite frankly, ridiculously powerful. Imagine an RDNA 3 class GPU which has 80 compute units on it, and it's outperforming the 6900 XT by, let's say, 50%, if that information is accurate. That is, quite frankly, nuts. And this is probably going to be one of the biggest leaps in recent memory anyway in graphics. I mean, it is, quite frankly, ridiculous. So the question is, how can Nvidia compete? We know that Hopper, of course, is coming from Nvidia, but as we all know, that is chiplet based, but it's not the next architecture which gamers get. Copity7Kimi has done a really great job leaking a ton of stuff for Nvidia in the past, including Lovelace, which features over 18,000 CUDA cores, which is significantly more, of course, than what we have with, let's say, the RTX 3080 or even the RTX 3090. Assuming that we saw a GPU built around that without any architecture improvements whatsoever and without higher clock frequencies. However, from everything I'm hearing, it seems that Nvidia themselves believe that AMD will have the advantage in rasterization performance. And this is something that I've been hearing from multiple people right now. So I really do not want you to think of this video as being an Nvidia is doomed idea. In fact, I believe far from it. I think that Nvidia right now are doing what they should do. They are taking stock of their options, and they are probably responding much better to the AMD threat than what Intel did against AMD, when of course they were just getting absolutely pounded by release after release of Ryzen. And then, yeah, Intel's kind of responses were kind of, they did their best, but they were kind of being held back, of course, by their 10nm process, which we all know about. So one thing I'm hearing is that Lovelace might not be for gamers. I want to stress, Lovelace is real, Copity7Kimi's information is correct, but I'm hearing that Lovelace might not be an architecture which is designed for gaming. I am a little skeptical of that because, quite frankly, it seems that the Switch Pro is going to be utilizing Lovelace. However, again, I'm being told this now by two people, that Lovelace is not for an RTX 40 release. So what does, if my information is correct, that mean Nvidia will do? Well, do you remember back on the roadmap from Nvidia, and they mentioned that it was like Ampere, Ampere next, Ampere next? Well, honestly, at the time, I assumed that this would mean, quite frankly, that Nvidia were just going to release, well, Lovelace, and then it was Hopper, but they were just not naming the architectures. However, if what I'm hearing is correct, we instead get an Ampere refresh. Now, to be clear, a refresh is not necessarily a bad thing, and it could be that Nvidia believes that this is the best policy going forward. Just the move to 5nm alone would be very beneficial for Nvidia. Higher clock frequency, as you all know, equal good. But they also could get quite a lot of mileage with some modest tweaks on their architecture. It was explained to me by one person, which another person told me that that makes sense based on what they were hearing, although it was more of a it makes sense rather than them confirming it. But I was told that Nvidia might be willing to sell their new architectures, or I guess more specifically, Ampere refresh at cheaper prices and compete in the lower end and let AMD win in the halo. Now that would be very un-Nvidia-like, as I'm sure most of you would agree. However, I can't necessarily think of another way for Nvidia to compete in the bleeding edge, because they are basically competing with a monolithic die against chiplets. And even if we were to say that the performance targets of RDNA 3 were blown out of proportion, let's say that they are. Let's say it's not 2.7, 2.5, it's, let's say 2.1, 2.2, which again, if you double the number of compute units, you're increasing the clock frequency, you're increasing IPC, it's not difficult to imagine that they could hit those targets very conservatively. Nvidia would still most likely be at a deficit. And I think that Nvidia, though, are not screwed, as I just mentioned a moment ago. They are doing what they need to do. They have a really, really, really big mind share in computing at the moment in gaming. Like it or not, GeForce is, generally speaking, the architecture that most people think of when it comes to a gaming GPU. If you were to ask your friend who doesn't necessarily know a whole bunch about PC gaming, they're going to probably just call the card a GeForce. Like, I actually have friends, and they don't call them graphics cards, they call them GeForces. And that just gives you an idea of the power of Nvidia's mindshare. And I'm just being blunt, guys, that's how it is. Let me know if anyone you know says the same thing. I'm curious to see whether that's just my friends, whether they're just, I don't know. Let me know. But Nvidia currently are pushing DLSS in everything. And obviously AMD have their competitor coming soon, FSR, and it's looking really good. I still think that FSR is not going to have quite the image quality of DLSS, but obviously it's a rather different method that AMD are utilizing. However, I'm almost positive at this point that the Switch Pro will be using DLSS, and this is going to be very important, getting it in the minds and hands of gamers. This is not to say that we're going to see a ton of PC ports. Mario, for example, or Zelda is not going to suddenly appear on Steam. I bloody well wish it would, but it's very unlikely. However, again, it's not necessarily about that. It's because there are so many games from other developers which will end up on the Switch Pro. And again, it's just familiarizing themselves as well as just being in the public eye. You know, while AMD have a ton of benefits with, let's say, Zen, in the hands of gamers, because of the PlayStation or Xbox, or RDNA being in the hands of the Xbox, but it's also, again, the mindshare. If you're an Xbox fan, there's a greater chance that you'll probably just see a Radeon graphics card, RDNA, oh, okay, and you might pick that up. I'm just saying, mindshare and these kind of things are extremely important. Closing up the video, I'm left with a lot more questions than honestly I have answers, and I think that it's kind of an exciting time for me. I love the fact that I'm getting so much conflicting information because, quite frankly, it makes tech kind of interesting. There was a time when, quite honestly, graphics cards were cool because new graphics cards, or new CPUs were cool because new CPUs, but oh look, it's the 4770K, it's a bit faster. Oh look, the 4790K, it's a bit faster. It's great because I'm a PC gamer, but it's not that exciting. But now there's so much cool stuff coming out, damn it. And we can argue all day long about Nvidia's motivations for LHR, light hash rate cards, and quite frankly, that's way outside of the scope of this video. But whether you think it's from the goodness of their hearts or you take a cynical view, it doesn't really matter. Hopefully anyway, it will start to trickle down to gamers, which obviously is what matters at the end of the day, us having cards to play on. This is not to say that I hate miners or anything like that, but I'm not a miner and I'm a PC gamer, so I'm obviously going to push for my own interests because I'm a stinker like that. But yeah, I think that gaming is going to come kind of full circle with PC. And I'm also curious because Intel obviously are getting into things. And XD is probably not going to be able to outperform these next generation cards from Nvidia or AMD. I'm hearing again that we're looking at 3070, 3080-ish performance, and those cards are not going to be released this year. It's looking like those cards are going to be released next year, which basically means that by the time that Intel actually have cards on store shelves, they're going to be kind of low to mid tier versus RDNA 3 and whatever Nvidia release in, like, let's say 3 to 6 months after that. I guess we'll see on that part of the market. But honestly, if Intel can release a GPU which is like, let's say $300, which is roughly on par with the 3080, if that information is true, I'm going to be really bloody happy. Like, Intel, you've got a thumbs up from me. With that said, thank you very much for checking out the video. If you've enjoyed it, you know what to do. You click the thumbs up button and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. With that said, take care of yourselves. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.